Hello, in this video I'm going to talk to you about large-scale data sets. Just within this past semester, you could say, I guess this past fall, we had 3 different students graduate who had each used a large-scale data set, a different large-scale data set. So the first one by Dr. Burleson, she looked at the effect of suspensions on academic achievement for special education students. Dr. Shannon looked at grade retention and reading achievement. And then Dr. Vader looked at this idea of the Catholic school advantage by comparing academic outcomes between Catholic schools, private schools, and other religious schools. So just within one semester, we had 3 dissertations be successfully defended that used large-scale data sets. And the data sets all came from different places. The first example about special education and discipline data came from a large suburban school district, and she used data from 2015 to 2017. The second example came from TEA, where she looked at reading achievement and then an indicator of retained or not retained. And then the last example came from the early childhood longitudinal data set, where she looked at achievement and socioeconomic data from 2011 to 2015 from Catholic, private, and other religious schools. 2 other students I didn't mention also graduated, and in their dissertations they used the MAP testing at the district level, and it was a different suburban district. So as we go through this course 8304, and I'm asking you to either gather data, locate data, if you're in a position where you can have access to lots of data, or use some of this large-scale publicly available data. For this course, definitely, but then also I want you to be thinking about it for potential use in your dissertation. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes you can complete a dissertation in a shorter amount of time if you use already existing data. Now, just like with qualitative, parts of it can be time-consuming, but in quantitative, it's kind of a different type of time-consuming. You might have to learn a bit about the large-scale data set, how to pull the data set, and then the analyses you're using, where in qualitative you might spend time interviewing, observing, lots of field work hours. So I don't want to say that quantitative is always quicker than qualitative, but it's a different type of time. Alright, so what I've pulled together here are quite a few resources for you related to large-scale data sets. So I want to first talk to you about some data sets that are available through the CDC, so the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So I tried to get a variety of types of data and not just all school-related data. So these other data sets are data about children and youth, adolescents, young adults, but not necessarily in the school setting. So again, just try to provide a variety. But anyway, the CDC has this division of adolescent and school health, and under that they conduct the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System. They've collected data since 1991, and the latest collection was in 2017. They've collected data on more than 4 million high school students. Just some of the topics, and these are very broad because I'll show you in a second. The questions they ask are really, really interesting, but some of the big topics are violence, unintended pregnancy, tobacco use, dietary behaviors, sexual identity, asthma, all sorts of things. And I think presenting big categories to you is almost a disservice because it doesn't really dig into what the data set has to offer. So just know that when I give you this information, we are definitely just skimming the surface. So let me show you what I'm talking about. For a lot of these, I've pulled just a little example of the data and what's available. So let me find the right one. Let's see. I'm not sure if that's the right example. They've gotten out of order. Oh well. Let me just pull up this one. The health education. I don't think this is it. No, this is health policies and practices. But I will get to this one in just a second. And now my Adobe is not responding. Yay, recording. It's so fun. Alright, it'll stop in a second. Just talk amongst yourselves. This is not really happening. There we go. Okay, at least I can get rid of it. Okay, I don't want to spend too much more time digging through this. There we go. State and local youth risk behavior survey. Let's look at it. How old are you? What's your sex? What grade are you in? Hispanic or Latino? What's your race? Your height? Your weight? Alright, here we go. How often do you wear a seatbelt? How many times did you ride in a car driven by someone who had been drinking alcohol? How many times did you drive a car when you had been drinking? Did you text or email while driving in a vehicle? How many times did you carry a weapon? Did you carry a weapon on school property? Did you carry a gun? Did you carry a gun on school property because you didn't feel safe? So all sorts of questions. So that's what I meant by, and I'll post these examples as well, but that's what I meant by looking at these big topics. I think we miss out on some of what this data set has to offer. Alright, let's look at another one by the CDC. They also have this one that I accidentally pulled up before about the school health policies and practices. They've been collecting data since 1994. It's a national survey. They collect data from the state, district, school, and classroom. Now, every time they administer this survey, they don't collect it from every place. So one year they might collect it from the state and the school. The next year they might collect it from the district and the classroom, or just the classroom. And so it just kind of depends the year. And on the website they have this really neat schedule where they talk about, okay, in this administration this is what we collected and this is who we collected it from. So it's pretty informative. You can see it's got faculty and staff, health education, health services, healthy school environment, nutrition, physical activity. So let me see if I can pull that one up again. Okay, so this is for the district. So this is one of the times they collected data, looks like in 2016, from the district. So you can go in and look at some of the questions they're asking administrators. So like, has your district adopted a policy stating schools will follow any health education standards? Are they based on the national health education standards? Are they based on the national sexuality education standards? So at the elementary school level, do you follow an elementary school health education? And then what does it involve? What standards are followed specifically? So it gets into it. So you can kind of see the level of detail that's provided. And even if the title doesn't exactly match what you're interested in, I encourage you to get into the questionnaires and the surveys to see if they have collected data on something that you care about. Okay, so that's another CDC. The CDC also has this global school-based student health This was developed by the World Health Organization, the WHO. It collects data from students 13 to 17 years on these topics, and again, once you get into it, you'll see the depth of the questions they ask about these different topics. Tobacco, violence, drugs, hygiene, and so on. But one thing I found so interesting was that the results can be used to help countries develop priorities, establish programs, advocate for resources, and so on. So I could see that we have a graduate from Ghana who had talked about going back to Ghana after graduation and opening a school. I could see her digging into this data from Ghana to look at, okay, how's it going, what's going on there now, and what parts of this do I need to be aware of or even have methods to address in the school that I'm opening. But you also, if you're not planning to do something like that, you might just want to compare what's going on around the world. Look at all the countries they collect data from. It's just incredible, the number. Alright, so Trinidad and Tobago is on there, where we went on the last study abroad. Okay. The next large-scale data set from the CDC is the National Youth Physical Activity and Nutrition Study. So looking in 2010, now what I tried to do when I was looking at these large-scale data sets was only bring in information about data sets that were relatively recent. So this is 2010, I don't know, that's 9 years ago. It was kind of getting on the verge of being outdated, and some of the ones that haven't been collected since the early 2000s or the 90s I did not include, but this one may be still relevant. Public and private schools, grades 9 to 12, they measured height and weight, and then they followed up with a telephone interview to ask about dietary issues. Next we have the school health profiles. So these are at the school level, and it's a system of surveys that assess school health policies and practices. So if you're interested in policy analysis, we have states and large urban school districts and territories that participate in this survey. The Texas as a whole does not participate, but Houston does participate. It's conducted every other year since 2006. Middle and high school principals and lead health education teachers look at the policies related to everything you see here. School-based health, bullying, sexual harassment, PE, family engagement, community involvement. So if you look at the title, School Health Profiles, you might not realize that community involvement is included. And I know some of you are definitely interested in getting families involved and communities involved. Okay, so there's something to consider. Now again, all these are publicly available. You go to the CDC, you find the survey you're interested in, you read and learn about how to pull their data, and there you go, you have it. Alright, next big place we have the National Center for Health Statistics. So I did not go through all of these. Some of these may be kind of in a more extended way related to what you're interested in, but I did want to bring them to your attention that they are there, these and more. Any that I didn't think were related to us and our interests at all, I did not include, but if you look at just some of the examples, we have fetal death, National Survey of Family Growth, National Vital Statistics System, National Immunization Survey, the Longitudinal Studies of Aging, and so on. So if any of that sparks an interest in you, I encourage you to go and check those out. Next we have the Institute of Museums and Library Services. So this one I found out about through an interest of one of your classmates. And so, looking for library data, I came across this Public Libraries Survey. It's conducted every year from 1998 to present, and it collects information on the status of public libraries in the U.S. Approximately 9,000 public libraries and 17,000 individual library outlets participate. They look at library visits, circulation, size of collections, and so on. And the really cool thing about this is this data can be combined with other federal, state, and local data. So, for example, the American Community Survey, American Housing Survey, the census, the library survey can be combined with that information. And I can't even wrap my head around all the research questions that could be answered with those kind of combinations. Alright, so that's available. The Texas Data Repository. So this is bringing together the academic libraries in Texas and providing a place for faculty, staff, and students to archive data sets. It's open source, so you can go and have access to this at no cost. There are all sorts of disciplines, all the sciences, history, social sciences, any topic, any subject you can imagine. Provides data, but also code books, but it doesn't contain any confidential or sensitive information. And if you create a data set, work on a data set, you can add yours to the repository when you're finished, if you like. The Higher Education Research Institute out of UCLA has quite a bit of survey work going on. So it's the largest and oldest empirical study of higher education. And so all together, you can see it's made up of all these programs, but together it's called the Cooperative Institutional Research Program. Well, that is composed of all these surveys. And I put the year it started and the latest collection. So the freshman survey, your first college year survey, diverse learning environment survey, college senior survey, staff climate survey, and faculty survey. So we're looking at higher ed, and from every which way you can imagine. It's really interesting. The one that I'm most interested in comes from this faculty survey. So I pulled some of the constructs from the faculty survey, and it is like college reputation, likelihood of college involvement, academic disengagement, overall satisfaction with coursework, overall satisfaction, positive cross-racial interaction, negative cross-racial interaction, civic awareness, leadership, civic engagement, faculty interaction, specifically mentorship, student-centered instruction, habits of mind. So again, these topics are constructs. So, and a lot of times they are constructs because I can think this student-centered instruction construct, it's made up of, 10 or 15 questions. And so if you think of it, this is just a sample of the constructs, and each of these is made up of multiple questions across multiple instruments. You can kind of get an idea of the vast amount of data and variables that are available to you. So again, through this longitudinal program, you can look at data from staff, faculty, seniors, freshmen, your first year, diverse learning environments, and so on. So lots and lots out there. You do have to submit a request for them. So unlike the CDC or some other places we'll look at, the data is not just sitting there available to you. In this case, you have to submit a proposal. It's not extensive, but it's about like an IRB proposal. It's not all that long. You submit it. I'll write a letter of support for you, and then you'll be able to get access to this data. Alright, so there are those constructs again. The next one looks at community colleges, right? So we've looked at student issues, but not necessarily school issues. We looked at higher ed, now community college, faculty survey of student engagement, and then you kind of get the other side of the coin with the survey of student engagement. So you get the student perspective and the faculty perspective. Some of the ideas here, like teaching practices, teaching and learning, how do they spend their professional time, their academic mindset, and so on. Alright, so community college student data is available. Of course, another big source for us in education in Texas is TEA. This is pulled from their website and all of the data that's available. So you have educator data, school district data, performance data, student data, financial reports, program evaluations, and on and on and on, right? And we know that there's a ton of data out there. Some examples of student data would be AP and IB information, ACT, SAT, completion, graduation, dropouts, enrollment trends, grade level retention, other academic achievement data, just lots and lots and lots of data. Split up any which way you can imagine, right? Asking for TEA data is easy. The two students I've had request TEA data on a large-scale basis, it did take TEA to get them the data. It did take a while, but they eventually got it, and so it does happen, but you've got to kind of build that into your timeline. Another example of sort of the misconception that quantitative is faster than qualitative. Sometimes you have to wait a while for the data. Educator data is here also from TEA, so highly qualified teacher, PEIMS reports that has all sorts of stuff in it, teacher certification, educator demographics, attrition and retention. So anyone looking at teacher attrition or teacher retention, here's some data on how's it going, what's going on in Texas. You could look at attrition related to salary. That might be interesting. Attrition related to enrollment. Who knows? But just some thoughts off the top of my head. Next, we have the Institute of Education Sciences. So this is it is a big source of publicly available data that is immediately available. So I say that it's immediately available, but sometimes you might be interested in what's called restricted data. And we'll talk about that later, but this assumes what you're looking for is just publicly available, and you could pull that today or tomorrow and have it available for use. Alright? The piece of the IES that we're going to look at is the National Center for Education Statistics, and I know we've mentioned this one in class before, but NCES collects data on all these different areas. These are big, and these are large-scale data collection processes. So at the international level, post-secondary, library, international, I've got international twice, elementary, secondary, and early childhood. Alright, so just some examples of international data. See, you thought all there was the TIMSS, right? Look at all these international surveys that NCES has collected data for. So you have the TIMSS, International Math and Science Study. We have the International Reading Literacy Study, International Computing and Information Literacy Study, Program for International Students Assessment, International Assessment of Adult Competencies, Teaching and Learning International Survey, and the Early Learning Survey. So, pretty awesome. I didn't go into detail on all of these because there's so much to go over in terms of large-scale data sets. Thinking at the post-secondary level, so again, I'm going to back up for a second. This is still NCES data. So we did international, and we're going to look at some post-secondary data that's available to you. This one's called Baccalaureate and Beyond, started in 1992. has collected data as recently as 2018. And so all these topics, and again, this just skims the surface. You got to get in there and look at those instruments to see exactly what's going on, because undergraduate education, job search activities, education and employment experiences after graduation. So wouldn't it be interesting to look at STEM majors and their employment experiences after graduation, starting, maybe sometime in the 90s, and seeing how it's changed over the years. Kind of couple that with, or layer that with, the changing emphasis on STEM education or not. What's going on in education that might impact a certain, I don't know, I'm just talking off the top of my head, but tons and tons of research possibilities there. Beginning post-secondary students' longitudinal studies follow students from when they first begin their post-secondary education, first-time undergraduates, how they transition through post-secondary and into the labor force, family formation, persisters, stop-outs, dropouts, vocational completers, started in 1989 and have data all the way up to 2017. Another post-secondary, we hear a lot about career and technical education. This survey has been collecting data from students, faculty, and schools on career and technical education since 2006. Alright, high school and beyond, I just included this one because even I've heard about high school and beyond, but it did stop in 1992, so I don't know if that is relevant, but maybe, especially if you wanted to do a comparison or something to more current times. We also have the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study. Now this caught my attention. How students and their families pay for post-secondary education. And that means undergraduate and graduate students in all sorts of different institutions. This has been measured every 3 to 4 years since 1987. Wouldn't it be neat to see how this has changed with the horrendously increasing college tuition? Alright, there are also post-secondary transcript collections where you can look at student course-taking patterns, credit transfer, and post-secondary education outcomes. And again, I hate to sometimes even talk about what's in the survey because I feel like I'm not doing it justice. There's so much out there. But this started in 2002 and goes on to 2000. Last data collection is 2017. And it's ongoing, but that's just the last time they collected data. Early childhood, which I love. A lot of stuff going on here. You have the original ECLS. Then they started a different one where they started following kids from birth. Because remember, the original ECLS started in kindergarten in 1998. Then they started looking at kids in 2000 who were born and followed them up to kindergarten. And then they looked at, this is the kindergarten 1998. I was wondering why this title looked dark. This is kind of like an umbrella. This first one is the umbrella over these three. So the kindergarten class of 98, and then another more recent kindergarten class of 2011. And of course, the one I'm interested in is this 2011, and I know I've talked to y'all about this too. You're probably tired of hearing about it, but I wanted to bring in some of the variables that are available here. Height, weight, birthday, age at assessment, disability status, primary language, first-time kindergartner, child's age at kindergarten entry, kindergarten class type, receipt of special ed services, child assessment status, non-parental care variables, before and after school care, non-parental care during the years prior to kindergarten, family and household composite variables like household counts, food security, and measured in several different ways, so just tons and tons of information. There are the executive function measures, of course different achievement measures, math and reading for sure, over the course of the years for these students, so kindergarten up to 5th grade. Massive amounts of information, publicly available. Could pull it down tomorrow. Alright, the National Household Education Surveys have been conducted in these years to look at school readiness and family involvement in education. And so it looks at all these, like before and after school, civic involvement, early childhood use, library use, readiness, safety, and so on. I know this is getting to be a really long presentation, so I'm trying to hurry through them. Elementary and secondary, so you have your beginning teacher longitudinal survey, crime and safety survey, so you have your school survey on crime and safety, school crime supplement to the National Crime Victimization Survey. They're looking at gangs, bullying, cyberbullying's in there, school security, policies, prevention, all sorts, age 12 to 18, and the most recent data is 2017. I had a student look at cyberbullying from this survey one year, so it was really interesting. And regular bullying, so it was a nice comparison of the two. Right, another one, this is the Education Longitudinal Study of 2002, so a little bit old. 10th graders in 2002 and 12th graders in 2004, and then followed them through secondary and post-secondary years. The last time they collected data was in 2013. So it's kind of an interesting view of their track through the end of high school and through college and out of college. High school longitudinal study. So in 2009, they started collecting data on more than 25,000 ninth graders. And again, they looked at high school, post-secondary, and early career. They talked to students, administrators, math and science teachers, counselors, parents, and administrative records. So tons and tons and tons of information there. Really, any variable you can imagine is collected here. The middle grades longitudinal study of 2017. We all know that the middle grades are really tough. Transition to high school, social and emotional and executive function measures, contextual factors in student outcomes, academic progress, the experiences of the students during these years, the private school survey, so they have that started in 1990, rural education in America, and then they also have urban education in America. Right? So if rural education is of interest to you, or urban, or both, there you go. There's a whole data set dedicated to you. National Teacher and Principal Survey. Now we have some of those in here. Descriptive data, elementary and secondary. You can integrate it with other education data. Principal, teacher, and student characteristics. Have the NAEP, National Assessment of Education Progress. We all are familiar with this one. Grades 4, 8, and 12. Student performance by any factor you can imagine, really. This started in 1969. Different subjects and different grades are tested in different years. So again, they have a nice table on their website that tells you what data was collected in what year. Again, starting in 1969. Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies. It replaced the one I mentioned earlier, the National Assessment of Adult Literacy, 2011-2012. So this is looking at the nation's progress in adult skills like literacy, numeracy, problem solving. When you're thinking about a data set to use, think about, like I mentioned before, is this public or restricted? I can give you an example. The very second or so slide when I was talking about students who have used large-scale data sets, Dr. Bader, she was originally interested in comparing urban-based urban-based Catholic schools with the same similarly located charter schools, because she is a longtime Catholic educator, and she really feels like the charter schools are the biggest competition for urban Catholic schools. And so that was where her real interest was. Well, when we got into it, we were able to pull all the data, and when we were kind of cleaning it up and looking at it, we realized the charter school information was restricted. So why was it restricted? Well, because NCES wants to protect the identity of all their respondents, right? So if I could tease the data so that I could potentially identify some charter schools, or at least say, charter schools in the metro area of Houston, like maybe I could tease the data down and identify it even to that degree, well, that would be bad for NCES. They don't want their participants to be identified even at that kind of larger level. And so to avoid that, what they do is they restrict some of the data. So the charter school breakdown was restricted. So we were sunk and very upset and kind of in a panic, thinking, oh my gosh, your whole study, what are we going to do? And so on the website, it talks about getting access to the restricted data. So you can have access to the restricted data, but you have to have a license. And the license has to be, there's no cost, but it has to be gained through the university. A large school district could probably do it. Some other research entity, but someone has to basically take on the liability that if I were to publish a study where I tried to identify at some level someone from the data or some group from the data and got sued, the university would take responsibility for that. So that's essentially what it's about. But the process to get the license was longer than the timeline we were on. So consequently, she revamped her study, and she was able to compare Catholic schools with private schools and other religious schools. So still of interest to her, but not quite what she wanted to do in the beginning. So anyway, long way to say, is it public or restricted? The cost, sometimes there is a cost to data. The timeline to request and receive data, the UCLA data and TEA, they have a process to go through. I know even some of the school districts have a process. I was helping someone get the UCLA data or apply for the UCLA data, and they only review proposals one Wednesday a month, and you have to have your proposal in the Wednesday before that Wednesday. And then if they need revisions to your proposal, they're not going to look at your update until the next monthly meeting. You see what I mean? So you got to think about the timeline, especially if you're really in a compressed situation where you need it immediately. There are some technical considerations like weights, being able to download the data you need. That's a little bit of a learning curve. And then what analysis programs or program are you going to use? Do you need to learn something new, which is always a good thing. Fortunately for the NCES data, they do have online dataset training, and I've provided the link there, and it is phenomenal. They have kind of generally training about the data sets, and then they give training about each individual data set. So what I also think is interesting, okay, so this is what I've already talked about with the restricted data, but they do not, let me go back up here, they do not provide the distance learning for all of the data sets, like the one I'm interested in, the ECLS 2011. They do not have online training for that, and I think it's because there are still groups that offer face-to-face training. So I was looking at going to a conference to present, And I noticed that as a, I don't know what it's called, like a pre-conference seminar, you might say, or a pre-conference workshop. So the day before the conference starts, there is an organization that's offering training on how to use the ECLS 2011. And I thought, oh, well, that's why they don't have online training for that, because there are still people out there offering face-to-face, probably for a cost, and that's okay. But anyway, just kind of FYI, there is some training available. Restricted use, publicly available, that's data that you can download now. Complex sample designs and standard error. So I won't get into a lot of this right now, but just be aware that if you're going to use a large-scale data set, we will have to take into consideration the ways in which they pulled their sample, but because they have a very complex sampling design, sometimes the sample is not 100% a representation of what's going on in the population. And so there are some correction methods we can use, like the variance estimates are not accurately calculated. And then we also, that's a little bit more about the variance estimates, but we also want to consider the sampling weights that we would apply to a given large-scale data set. And so for our purposes right now, I wouldn't say, I'll go spend a bunch of time learning about the effect on standard error and this complex sampling design, and then also sampling weights. Just kind of keep it in the back of your mind that if you use a large-scale data set, those are things that we need to address as you start to analyze your data. Where to start? Thinking about, and this is where to start related to NCES data, but really it's any large-scale data set. So think about, can your question be answered using the data that you found or that you think might be there? Do you have the time and energy to invest into learning how to access the data, pull the variables you would like to use, kind of train yourself with the online training, and then do any other sort of training that's needed? Do you have the statistical package available, and so on and so on? So some things to think about as you decide whether or not this is something you want to pursue. Again, I don't want to scare you off from it at all, because I really, really encourage you to use large-scale data sets, certainly for this class, but then also for your dissertation data. Now, I'll say one last thing and then I'll go. If you are going to pull a large-scale data set for the paper and the presentation in this class, I would not expect you to, go back up here, I would not expect you to think about the weights or the issues with standard error, because we're just not there yet. If and when you decide to submit for publication, then we would go back and do a little bit of revision with your analysis or analyses. But for the purpose of this class, I really encourage you to pull a large-scale data set and to make that a little more doable for you. We're not going to worry about weights, and we're not going to worry about the standard error issues. Okay? Alright, I think that's it. I know this is a super long video, so thank you for your attention.